In early March of 1951, 1 year into the brutal Korean War, Private First Class Francis P. Wall and the men of the United States Army's 25th Infantry Division were stationed along the frozen mountain slopes near the town of Chon, deep inside a region soldiers grimly called the Iron Triangle, a place where artillery thunder never truly faded and the line between life and death shifted with every hour. And on that particular night, Wall's unit, Easy Company of the 27th Regiment, had completed the grim task of evacuating Korean villagers from the valley below, warning them that their homes would soon be obliterated by American artillery fire, an order carried out not with cruelty, but with the cold necessity demanded by war. And as darkness settled over the mountains, the bombardment began, shells arcing through the sky and bursting in blinding flashes above the deserted village, lighting the valley like a violent storm trapped in the earth itself, while the soldiers watched from there, positions carved into rock and soil, their backs pressed against the mountainside, believing that this night would be no different from dozens before it, until something impossible appeared, drifting silently from the eastern ridge, a perfectly round object surrounded by a soft orange glow, descending the mountain as if guided by an intelligence rather than gravity. And at first the men barely reacted, assuming it to be a flare, a lantern, or some trick of the battlefield haze. Yet, as the glowing object continued its descent, their unease grew, because it did not flicker, did not fall, and did not behave like anything they had ever seen, instead moving deliberately into the heart of the artillery explosions, slipping from one airburst to the next with uncanny precision, as though it could sense where each shell would detonate before it happened. And despite passing directly through fire and shrapnel that tore the air apart, the object remained completely unharmed, unshaken, and disturbingly calm. And for what felt like an eternity, though Wall would later estimate it to be nearly an hour, the soldiers stood frozen, rifles lowered, fear tightening in their chests as they watched the glowing sphere hover over the ruined village, pulsating slowly, silently observing the destruction below, until without warning it changed course, abandoning the valley and rising back up the mountainside toward their position. And as it climbed, the light began to shift, the orange glow, transforming into a brilliant blue-green radiance that washed across the rocks and snow, revealing every face, every weapon, and every terrified expression in unnatural clarity. And when the object finally stopped, hovering no more than 30 feet above the soldiers' heads, the night itself seemed to hold its breath, leaving only the low rumble of distant artillery and the sound of men struggling to steady their hands. And in that moment, Francis Wall felt a surge of instinctive dread unlike anything he had experienced in combat, a certainty that whatever hovered above them was not enemy aircraft, not friendly technology, and not of any nation fighting this war. And driven by fear, training, and the simple need to act, Wall turned to his company commander, Lieutenant Dell Evans, and requested permission to fire on the object, a request that was granted without hesitation, because no officer could allow an unknown presence to hover unchallenged over his men. And as Wall raised his M1 rifle, loaded with armor-piercing rounds, and squeezed the trigger, the sharp crack of the shot echoed across the mountains, followed by a sound that no one expected, the unmistakable metallic impact of a bullet striking solid surface, a sound that confirmed beyond doubt that the glowing object was real, physical, and present. And in that single instant, as the echo faded into the night, the rules of the world Francis Wall thought he understood quietly collapsed, replaced by the terrifying realization that the war had just intersected with something far beyond human conflict or comprehension. None of the men yet understood that this brief moment would follow them forever, shaping their memories, bodies, and beliefs, and marking the beginning of a mystery that history would struggle to explain fully, truthfully. The moment Francis Wall's armor-piercing round struck the hovering object, the mountainside erupted into chaos as the glowing sphere reacted violently, its steady blue-green light flickering wildly before snapping off altogether for a heartbeat that felt endless, and then returning in sharp, erratic pulses as the object lurched from side to side like something wounded but not defeated. And almost immediately a sound rolled across the frozen slopes that no soldier there had ever heard before. A deep mechanical roar resembling a massive diesel locomotive revving at full power, vibrating through bone and earth alike. A sound so heavy and unnatural that it seemed to press down on the men's chests, stealing their breath. And as Wall and the others struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing, beams of invisible force suddenly swept outward from the object in rhythmic pulses, striking the soldiers where they stood. And though there were no visible flames or projectiles, the effect was immediate and terrifying, as Wall felt an intense burning and tingling sensation race across his entire body, as if his skin were on fire and something unseen was passing straight through him, bypassing flesh and muscle, leaving him weak, disoriented, and nauseated, while men around him cried out in fear and confusion, some dropping to their knees, others clawing at their uniforms in a desperate attempt to escape the sensation, and recognizing that whatever was happening was far beyond their ability to fight. Lieutenant Dell Evans shouted orders for the company to fall back into their bunkers, underground dugouts carved into the mountainside for protection from artillery and small arms fire. And the men scrambled for cover, half blind from the light and shaking from the strange assault, as the object continued to hover above their position, bathing the area in a brilliance brighter than daylight, revealing the terrain in harsh, unnatural clarity, every rock casting sharp shadows, every movement painfully visible. And from within his bunker wall peered through the narrow firing slit with another soldier, watching as the glowing sphere drifted slowly overhead, its presence oppressive and deliberate, as though it were examining them, measuring their reactions, or confirming some unknown objective. And for several long minutes the object remained there, the strange mechanical sound rising and falling, the pulses of energy washing across the mountainside, leaving the men trembling and helpless, until suddenly the light intensified once more, and with no warning the object shot upward at a steep angle, accelerating so fast that it vanished into the night sky almost instantly, leaving behind only silence, smoke, and the stunned disbelief of the soldiers who slowly emerged from their bunkers, unsure whether what they had just endured was real or some collective nightmare brought on by exhaustion and fear. Yet the physical consequences quickly proved otherwise, because within hours many of the men began vomiting violently, suffering crushing headaches and overwhelming weakness, symptoms that worsened as the night wore on. And in the days that followed, the situation deteriorated rapidly, as nearly the entire company became too ill to perform even basic tasks, forcing the army to evacuate them by ambulance over hastily cut mountain roads. A highly unusual and alarming measure during active combat operations. And when military doctors examined the men, they were baffled by what they found, noting extremely elevated white blood cell counts and severe gastrointestinal distress that resembled radiation sickness, yet could not be explained by any known exposure or weapon in the area. And despite the seriousness of the incident, a quiet decision was made among the officers and men regarding the daily company reports, because to describe a glowing object descending from the sky, resisting artillery fire, and attacking the unit with unknown energy would almost certainly result in ridicule, accusations of madness, or confinement. And so the event was reduced to silence, buried beneath routine language and incomplete explanations, even as every man who had been there understood that something extraordinary had happened, something that had crossed into their war uninvited, harmed them without warning, and departed without leaving answers, ensuring that the memory of that night would linger not just in their minds, but in their bodies as a constant reminder that they had survived an encounter with something that did not belong to their world. Although Francis P. Wall survived the Korean War and returned to the United States in June of 1952 with an honorable discharge, the man who stepped back onto American soil was profoundly different from the young infantryman who had left only a year earlier, because while the fighting had ended for him on paper, the consequences of that strange night near Sicheon followed him relentlessly. embedding themselves into his body and mind in ways that no battlefield wound ever had, and almost. Immediately after returning home to North Carolina, Wall began to experience severe physical changes that puzzled both him and the doctors who examined him. As his weight dropped dramatically from nearly 180 pounds to just over 130, despite the fact that he felt constantly thirsty and struggled to maintain even a modest appetite, a condition that left him weak, fatigued, and frustrated. And this was accompanied by crushing headaches that arrived without warning. Pain so intense that it often forced him to leave work early or seek emergency medical care. Yet no physician could find a cause that explained why a young veteran with no visible injuries was deteriorating so rapidly. And as the years passed, these symptoms did not fade, but instead evolved, with Wall reporting episodes of dizziness, disorientation, and memory loss that grew increasingly troubling, including one disturbing period during which he could not recall an entire 3 days of his life. A gap in his memory that terrified him and deepened his conviction that something fundamental had been altered within him during the war. And though he attempted to live a normal life, finding employment and raising a family, the shadow of Korea remained close, surfacing unexpectedly through physical pain or sudden flashes of fear triggered by loud noises or the distant sound of aircraft. And despite these struggles, Wall rarely spoke openly about the encounter with the glowing object, knowing that claims of flying machines attacking soldiers would be dismissed as fantasy or insanity, especially in the early 1950s when no cultural framework existed for such stories. And so he confined the truth to private conversations with his wife and children, retelling the story the same way each time, careful, precise, and unwavering in its details, even as those who listened found it difficult to grasp the magnitude of what he described. And it was not until decades later, in the late 1980s, that Wall finally agreed to share his account publicly, when growing interest in unexplained aerial phenomena led researchers to seek out firsthand military witnesses from earlier conflicts. And during a recorded interview conducted in 1987, Wall spoke plainly and without embellishment, swearing that his story was the truth. So help him God. And when investigators examined his military records, they confirmed his service, his unit, his rank, and even the existence of Lieutenant Dell Evans, his commanding officer on that night, a highly decorated soldier who later worked in Army intelligence, lending further credibility to Wall's claims. And significantly, researchers found no evidence of any American, Soviet, or Chinese aircraft in 1951 capable of performing the maneuvers Wall described, nor any weapon that could explain the physiological effects suffered by his entire company. And this absence of conventional explanations only strengthened Wall's belief that the object was not experimental technology or a secret weapon, but something far more extraordinary, a conclusion he expressed openly when asked what he thought the object was, answering simply that it was an alien spacecraft, and that the government had chosen to suppress the truth to avoid panic or embarrassment. And while skeptics argued that stress, exhaustion, or the fog of war could produce vivid hallucinations, Wall rejected such explanations outright, pointing to the shared experience of dozens of men, the physical illnesses that followed, and the consistency of his memory over time. And though he never sought fame or profit from his story, Wall's willingness to speak out ensured that his encounter would not vanish entirely into obscurity, but instead become part of a growing body of testimony suggesting that the Korean War was not only a conflict between nations, but also a moment when humanity may have been observed, tested, or confronted by something entirely unknown, leaving Francis Wall to carry that burden quietly for the rest of his life. A living reminder that some wars never truly end when the fighting stops. On the same cold night in March of 1951, when Francis Wall's infantry company was recovering from its terrifying encounter on the mountains near Siechon, another unexplained event was unfolding high above the Korean peninsula, far from the frozen trenches, yet eerily connected by time, description, and circumstance, as a United States Air Force B-29 bomber flew a routine night mission at nearly 17,000 feet, its crew scanning the dark, moonless sky for enemy aircraft or flak, believing themselves isolated in the vast emptiness above the war, until a sudden flash of light appeared off the aircraft's right side, catching the attention of the left scanner, who instinctively called it out as a possible flare. Though even as he spoke, he sensed something was wrong, because the light did not fall or fade as flares did, but instead moved with deliberate control, glowing a reddish-yellow color that shifted in intensity as it descended slightly and then stabilized at the same altitude as the bomber. And within seconds, the object erupted into a brilliant blue-white burst so intense that several crew members glimpsed it from their stations, each struggling to describe what they had seen, because there was no visible shape, no wings, no exhaust trail, and no sound. Only light appearing where no aircraft should be. And while the encounter lasted only moments, it left a lasting impression on the crew, who reported the incident through official Air Force channels, their statements later compiled into a staff message report that listed the object as unidentified, acknowledging that it could not be confidently explained as flak, a flare, or a meteor, and though the Air Force would later file the case into its growing archive of unexplained sightings, the significance of the event would not be fully appreciated until years later, when researchers began comparing it to ground-based encounters from the same period, because the object described by the B-29 crew displayed several striking similarities to the one reported by Francis Wall, including the color shift from reddish-yellow to blue-white, the sudden burst of light, and the absence of any conventional aircraft features. And when investigators examined flight paths and geography, the connection grew even more unsettling, as the bomber had been flying roughly 40 miles southwest of Sichuan, positioned in a way that placed it directly west of Wall's company, meaning that if the object Wall described had accelerated upward and westward after leaving the mountains, as he insisted it did, it would have passed directly through the bomber's field of view. And this possibility transformed what might have been dismissed as two unrelated anomalies into a potential single event witnessed from both the ground and the air, lending each account additional weight, because the odds of two identical, unidentified objects appearing independently in the same region on the same night were difficult to ignore, especially during a period when radar, air patrols, and military surveillance were already stretched thin by wartime demands. And while skeptics argued that coincidence or misidentification could explain the overlap, the Air Force's own inability to classify the sighting suggested otherwise. And this was not an isolated case, because throughout the Korean War, dozens of pilots, radar operators, and ground personnel reported strange lights and objects performing maneuvers far beyond known aviation capabilities, creating a pattern that quietly alarmed military intelligence, even as such reports were downplayed publicly to avoid panic or ridicule. And for Francis Wall, learning years later that a bomber crew had seen something similar on the same night provided a grim validation of his memory, reinforcing his belief that the object was not a hallucination born of stress or fear, but a real presence moving through the skies with apparent ease and intent, observed independently by trained military witnesses in vastly different positions. And though no official conclusion was ever reached about what the B-29 crew saw, the incident remains one of the earliest documented cases of an unidentified aerial phenomenon intersecting with a major military conflict, suggesting that whatever entered the mountains above Wall's company that night did not vanish immediately into legend, but instead continued its journey through the sky, briefly revealing itself to others before disappearing once more into the darkness, leaving behind a trail of questions that neither soldiers nor historians have been able to fully answer. 3 decades after the frozen mountains of Korea bore witness to the strange encounter that marked Francis Wall for life, the mystery resurfaced thousands of miles away under vastly different circumstances, yet with details so eerily familiar that researchers would later struggle to dismiss the connection. Because in the early hours of March 17, 1981, along the mist-covered banks of the Columbia River near Portland, Oregon, a bright orange light appeared in the sky, moving slowly and deliberately, as if unconcerned with being observed. And the first to notice it was Sergeant Russell Yacom of the St. Helens Police Department, who was patrolling Highway 30 when the object caught his eye, illuminating the river and surrounding landscape so intensely that it appeared as though the sun were rising hours too early. And at first Yakum assumed it was an aircraft landing light approaching Portland International Airport. Yet almost immediately, he realized the brightness was far beyond anything he had ever seen from a plane, prompting him to radio his department and report an unidentified object in the sky. And as he repositioned himself closer to the river to get a clearer view, he was joined by local citizens and 2 Oregon State police officers, Ricky Cade and Tom McCartney, all of whom watched as the glowing orange object hovered silently over the water, maintaining a steady altitude and casting reflections that rippled across the river's surface. And what made the encounter even more unsettling was that the light was accompanied by sound, a deep, powerful mechanical noise described by multiple witnesses as resembling a massive diesel engine combined with a high-pitched screech, a sound so unnatural and overwhelming that it vibrated through the air and into their bodies, instantly reminding later investigators of Francis Wall's description of a diesel locomotive-like roar during his own encounter in Korea. And as the officers attempted to document what they were witnessing, they contacted a man across the river in Washington State via CB radio, a resident named Donald Ashins, who confirmed that he too could both see and hear the object from his home, describing the same intense light and the same frightening noise, and determined to capture evidence. The officers set up a portable tape recorder near their police radio while Ashins dangled his CB microphone out of his window to transmit the sound if it occurred again, creating a rare real-time audio record of the event. And for more than 20 minutes, the group observed the object as it drifted slowly, sometimes dimming slightly, sometimes glowing brighter, never behaving like any known aircraft, helicopter, or celestial phenomenon, until at approximately 4:29 a.m., the object began emitting the strange sound once more, the recording capturing the low rumble and screech that left even seasoned officers visibly shaken. And then, as a thick fog suddenly rolled in around the river, the orange light abruptly vanished, one officer later recalling that it made a brief whistling sound as it went out, followed by the sensation that it had risen rapidly upward and away. And within moments the fog parted just as suddenly as it had appeared, revealing a clear blue sky as though nothing unusual had occurred, an ending so abrupt and surreal that it left the witnesses stunned and adding to the mystery. The Coast Guard later confirmed that they had tracked an unidentified object on radar during the incident, while Portland Airport initially acknowledged seeing something on radar as well, only to retract that statement minutes later without explanation. And when the tape recording was analyzed by experts at the Center for UFO Studies, they concluded that the sound was unlike anything known in nature or conventional aviation and could not be attributed to helicopters or aircraft. A conclusion that strengthened the chilling parallel between this modern encounter and the one Francis Wall described 30 years earlier, because the similarities were impossible to ignore, from the orange light and mechanical roar to the sudden disappearance, and a lingering sense that whatever had been present was capable of controlling both its movement and the environment around it. And while skeptics continued to argue coincidence or misidentification, those who studied both cases began to wonder whether the object seen over the Columbia River was not a new phenomenon at all, but the same kind of presence that had silently descended upon a group of soldiers in Korea decades before, returning not as a relic of the past, but as a reminder that some mysteries do not fade with time, and that whatever watched from the sky in 1951 may still be watching, choosing its moments carefully, appearing briefly, and then vanishing before humanity can fully understand what it has seen. As investigators continued to examine Francis Wall's testimony alongside later encounters like the Columbia River incident, a far broader and more unsettling pattern began to emerge, one that suggested his experience in Korea was not an isolated anomaly, but part of a recurring phenomenon that appeared most often in times and places of intense human conflict. Because during the Korean War alone, between late 1950 and the winter of 1954, more than 60 military personnel, including pilots, radar operators, naval crews, and ground soldiers, officially reported sightings of unidentified aerial objects over the battlefield, with dozens of separate incidents describing glowing lights, fast-moving spheres, and objects capable of hovering, accelerating instantaneously, and changing direction without visible propulsion. Maneuvers that exceeded the technological limits of both American and Soviet aircraft at the time. And while many of these reports were quietly filed away, reclassified, or explained away as flares, balloons, or misidentified aircraft, a significant number remained unresolved even after detailed analysis, creating quiet concern within military intelligence circles that something unknown was operating in contested airspace. And it was this growing volume of unexplained encounters that eventually contributed to the establishment of Project Blue Book in 1952, a classified effort by the United States Air Force to systematically study reports of UFOs and assess whether they posed a threat to national security. And although the project publicly downplayed the majority of sightings, labeling most as misidentifications, internal documents revealed a persistent inability to explain a small but troubling percentage of cases, particularly those involving multiple trained witnesses or corroborating radar data, and Francis Wall's encounter fit uncomfortably well into this category, because it involved not only visual observation by dozens of soldiers, but also physical effects that lingered long after the object departed, effects that resembled radiation exposure yet could not be traced to any known source. And skeptics often argue that the extreme stress of combat, combined with fatigue and fear, could produce shared hallucinations or exaggerated memories, a phenomenon sometimes referred to as the fog of war. Yet this explanation faltered when confronted with the consistency of Wall's account over decades, the similar descriptions offered by unrelated witnesses in different eras, and the objective medical abnormalities documented in his unit. And beyond Korea, researchers noted that similar objects have been reported near American military bases, nuclear facilities, and training grounds throughout the Cold War, suggesting an interest in humanity's most destructive capabilities rather than random curiosity. And this possibility unsettled even those who resisted the idea of extraterrestrial involvement, because it implied surveillance or monitoring by an intelligence that operated beyond conventional detection. And for Wall, learning about these broader patterns later in life brought little comfort, because instead of offering closure, they reinforced his belief that what he encountered was real and purposeful, something that chose when and where to appear, and that the silence surrounding such incidents was not accidental but institutional, driven by fear of public panic, ridicule, or the uncomfortable admission that humanity might not fully control its own skies. And while official narratives emphasized skepticism and restraint, cultural attitudes began to shift slowly in the decades that followed, as additional military personnel came forward, often late in life, to share their own encounters, describing objects that behaved in ways eerily similar to Wall's glowing sphere. And though technology advanced and explanations improved, the core mystery persisted, because even with modern sensors, satellites, and global surveillance, unidentified aerial phenomena continued to be reported by trained observers, echoing the same questions that first arose in the frozen mountains of Korea. And this continuity across time challenged the idea that such encounters were merely relics of an earlier, less technologically sophisticated era, instead suggesting a phenomenon that adapted, endured, or perhaps simply waited, revealing itself only briefly before retreating once more into obscurity. And in this context, Francis Wall's story took on a new significance, not as an isolated tale from a forgotten war, but as an early chapter in an ongoing narrative that humanity had only just begun to acknowledge, one that blurred the boundaries between history, science, and speculation, and forced an uncomfortable reckoning with the possibility that the fog of war did more than distort human perception, because it might also provide the perfect cover for encounters that challenge our understanding of reality itself, leaving behind patterns that remain just clear enough to recognize, yet too elusive to fully explain. Francis P. Wall spent the final decades of his life carrying memories that refused to fade, memories that surfaced not only in his thoughts, but in his body, in sudden flashes of fear, crushing headaches, and moments of disorientation that reminded him the war had never truly ended for him. And when he retired in 1969 at the unusually young age of 42, it was not because he wished to rest, but because the cumulative effects of his experiences had made ordinary life increasingly difficult to endure. As his daughter would later explain, that the man who returned from Korea was no longer the happy, easygoing person he had once been, but someone permanently altered by what he had seen and survived, and among the many traumas he carried. The strange encounter on the mountains near Sichuan remained the most vivid, replaying in his mind with remarkable clarity even as other details of his life faded with time. Because unlike the chaos of battle, which blurred into a haze of noise and fear, the appearance of the glowing object was precise, controlled, and sharply defined, an intrusion that did not feel random or accidental. And as the years passed and public discussion of UFOs slowly emerged from ridicule into cautious acceptance, Wall followed these developments closely, believing they validated what he had known all along, that the truth about such encounters had been deliberately hidden, not necessarily out of malice, but out of fear and uncertainty, because admitting the existence of something unknown and uncontrollable would challenge the very foundations of military authority and national security. And when he finally shared his story in formal interviews during the late 1980s, he did so without embellishment or hesitation, repeating the same details he had told his family for decades. A consistency that impressed investigators and suggested his memories were not inventions shaped by time, but deeply etched impressions that refused to change. And though no surviving members of his unit could be located to publicly corroborate his account, many having died in later battles or lost contact over the years, researchers confirmed the names, ranks, and movements Wall described, including those of Lieutenant Del Evans, a decorated officer who later served in Army intelligence and never publicly contradicted Wall's claims. And while skeptics continued to argue that stress, fear, or misinterpretation could explain the encounter, such explanations rang hollow when weighed against the physical illness suffered by the entire company, the independent aerial sighting reported by the B-29 crew on the same night, and the near-identical appearance and sound of the object witnessed again decades later in Oregon. And taken together, these elements form a narrative that was difficult to dismiss without dismissing the credibility of trained soldiers, pilots, police officers, and radar operators alike. And as Wall aged, his reflections on the encounter grew more philosophical than fearful, as he often stated that he did not believe humanity was alone in the universe, nor did he find that idea particularly threatening, instead suggesting that it was arrogant to assume humans possessed the only advanced technology anywhere, and that if something else was capable of visiting or observing Earth, then war zones filled with powerful weapons and intense energy might naturally draw attention. And when he passed away in 1999, his story did not end with him, but instead remained preserved in interviews, research files, and the memories of those who had taken the time to listen, standing as one of the most detailed and unsettling wartime UFO encounters ever recorded. And today, as governments around the world cautiously acknowledge the existence of unidentified aerial phenomena and release declassified documents that confirm decades of unexplained sightings by military personnel, Francis Wall's experience feels less like an anomaly and more like an early warning, a glimpse into a mystery that humanity has yet to fully confront. And perhaps the most disturbing question his story leaves behind is not what that object was, but why it appeared when it did, hovered over frightened soldiers without regard for national borders or human conflict, inflicted harm without obvious purpose, and then vanished, leaving no explanation, no answers, and no closure, forcing those who witnessed it to live the rest of their lives wondering whether they had been observed, tested, or simply reminded that even in humanity's darkest hours, we may not be as alone as we believe, a realization that lingers like fog long after the battle has ended.